Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Blast Motion Podcast. I'm your host, Maddie Lewis, and today's guest is a powerhouse in the world of softball. She was a 4-year starter at Michigan State with over 200 career starts and still ranks in the top 10 in hits, walks, and runs scored. Since 2018, she's been a cornerstone at Turn Into Softball in Brighton, Michigan, serving as Director of Player Development for the last 7 years. She is also the color analyst for Michigan High School Sports and state championships. She has coached over 300 players who've gone on to play at the collegiate level, including athletes at Georgia and 20-plus athletes at Big Ten and MAC programs. As part of Turning Two, she is leading an 18U national team where every player is committed to playing college, including 5 that are heading to Power 4 schools. She has a passion for the biomechanics of hitting and helping athletes unlock their full potential through body-specific training and movement optimization. Kenzie Long, everyone. Kenzie, thanks for joining us today, and welcome to the Blast Motion Podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Of course, yeah. I know you guys at Turn Into are a really big program at Blast, so I just figured, it'd be a great conversation. I know a lot of our listeners are going to be really interested to hear what you have to say. So with that said, tell us a little bit about your softball journey and how you got involved with Turn Into.
Yeah, I think I get that question a lot actually, because I'm a SoCal kid, born and raised in Southern California, and then I got the opportunity to play at Michigan State under Coach Jackie Joseph. And it was life-changing, life-giving, life-altering. And I knew I wanted to stay in the game of softball, and I really didn't know what that would look like. And so, by the grace of God, I got the opportunity to give a few lessons out of the Turning Two facility. And there I met Rodney Robeson, where he pitched me his idea of growing something like a college prep program in the state, something that we really didn't have in Michigan. We had great other organizations that were awesome, but we didn't have a program that was set on development. And so he brought me in and asked me if it would be something I'd be interested in. And I've been head first ever since.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, obviously you have a really awesome resume that you've built for yourself in the game of softball. And we spoke about this a little bit before, but were you a very analytical player, through your career? And what kind of introduced you and got your interest initially to that side of the game?
Yeah, when I was in college, I ended up suffering an injury that was a pretty significant injury. My freshman year, I ended up having TOS surgery, which is thoracic outlet syndrome surgery. And from that experience, I was limited in my practice time and limited in my swings. So by my senior year, I was only allowed to take 5 practice swings a week. And so I had to be very strategic on how I was going to take those swings. And so because of that, I had to learn how to compete in the game differently. Like I couldn't go and just, oh, we're going to face a rise ball pitcher today. Let me go take 100 hacks off the machine. I had to figure out a way to feel my body and feel the sequencing of the pitching and understand like what I'm trying to get my body to do without actually getting to do it often.
Right. Yeah. Obviously, suffering an injury is probably one of the hardest things as student athletes, but it's great that you're able to find a positive in it and maybe become a better player because of it too. And obviously such a big part of our game, especially as it continues to evolve. So how do you kind of, teach that to your athletes at Turn Into? Because, being able to connect your mind and body is so big. How do you kind of help them in that journey of their own?
Yeah, I think it's important for the players it's so often that players want to just like go in and hit and they go off a feel of everything. Like, well, if that looked good, then it felt good and it was important. And I think if you can win the game within the game, right? If you can understand what the game is trying to get out of you in that moment, all of a sudden the game slows down and is a lot easier. And so there's so many times I think we, myself included as players, is we like overanalyze like what we have to do at that certain situation, when in reality, if we simplify the game and understand what they're getting trying to get us to do and what we're trying to do, we end up accomplishing a lot more. And so an example of this would be like, there's a runner on first and second, they're probably going to throw me in low because they want me to ground out to third base. So those are a lot of things that we try to do and combat, is how can I shoot it the opposite way or shoot it in the gap or take that pitch to left center. And so a lot of ways that we have those conversations to have good, like you're saying, analyzing the game within the game so it doesn't seem so hard when the game is actually happening.
Right. Like a lot of my coaches growing up would always say like they're trying to speed up practice for us so that when we do get to the game, it feels slower and, it feels like we've been there before so that, we can kind of take a deep breath and let the game come to us a little bit.
I think that's a good point, and a couple years ago at the NFCA convention, I heard one of the speakers say this. They were saying, "Softball is the only sport where we don't practice as fast as we play," and, like, if you think about basketball and volleyball, like, you're running a bunch of sprints. Like, I know in Michigan, every kid plays high school basketball because it gets them in shape. That's what they love to do. It gets them in shape, and so but in softball, like, the game is so much slower in practice because we can't mimic a 2.8 runner down the first baseline. But one of the things that I kinda, like, dug into that a little bit, and I was trying to figure out, like, what does that actually mean, and what am I trying to produce in practice that makes the game easier? And the big thing is failure, right? I think that's the biggest thing we struggle with in our game is you fail so much, right? But then in practice, we're so quick to say, "Well, can I have one more? And can I get another ball? And can I, if I didn't like the last hit, I don't want to end on that one." And so one of the things that we tried to do and try to incorporate is like, no, we're going to fail 30 to or we're going to have a success rate of 30 to 40%. So we're going to fail 60 to 70% in practice. And like I want you to be okay with that. And I want you to like learn how to get back in the cage and figure it out. And if you have to leave and you missed a ball, it is okay. Because when you strike out, you don't get to say, "Hey, can I have another ball?" Like you have to walk off the field and try again next time. And so when we're trying to practice, when you're trying to speed up the game, the other thing that I like to do is like help the mindset that failure is going to happen and it's okay. And to be honest, like people laugh at me because if you hear me in practice, like I tell the kids like it is, like that was a terrible swing or that sucked because I don't want the outcome of the swing. Like if it was a good hit, but the swing wasn't very good, I don't want them to think that that translates in game. And so that's one of the things that we do in practice is like you're saying is like you have to be able to relate practice into game, and the only way to be able to do that is by speeding up the game in our minds, which makes it mentally tougher.
Yeah, I like that. I think, a lot of times we get like that one more syndrome, right? Where,
Mhm.
you're like trying to finish so hard on a good note, but I've never heard that before where you kind of just let, the athletes go home with failure. I think that's really awesome. And then you kind of learn to deal with it and be okay with it. And it's a lot more realistic. So that's a really good point that you made.
When
Um,
with the one more too that I don't know if you see it when you're working with athletes, but one of the things that I see is when I say, "Okay, last one," all of a sudden they can't hit the last one. And that's because of the pressure, right? That's the pressure they feel in the game is like, "Oh, it's the last one. Now I'm gonna swing a little bit harder. I'm gonna try to hit it a little bit faster." It's all these like pressures. And it's like they don't realize that like they're like, "Oh, I'm always terrible in the last one." No, you just all of a sudden care a little bit more, and now all of a sudden there is pressure on you, and so we try to treat a lot of our swings as last ones, so then that way we get used to, "No, I wanna swing with pressure, I wanna swing with the bat speed that I'm trying to create and all of those things that I'm trying to create, not just go through the motion and now all of a sudden the last one is the pressure one."
for sure. And then you tense up and you're like trying to make it
Mhm.
perfect. Yeah, that's a good point. Did you always know that you're gonna go into coaching once you hung up the cleats yourself, or, did it kinda just fall into place that way?
It was definitely a dream of mine. It was something that, like, I've from the beginning, like, I have loved the game, and I have desired to be a part of the game and desired to be a part of the game at a high capacity. I didn't know what that was gonna look like. Actually, it's funny because I was having a conversation with one of my teammates right before I graduated, and she was asking me what I wanted to do, and I was like, "Honestly, I wanna run a facility." But, like, how am I gonna do that? And in California, everybody does that. So I'm like, I couldn't, and I thought I was gonna go home. So I had no idea that my journey was gonna lead me to turning two and actually run a facility and run teams and run the development side of it.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think, as a student athlete myself, like so much of our identity is in the game. So, walking away from it when it's your last out of your college season is incredibly hard. So, a lot of times we try to find ways to stay in it. And I think,
Mhm.
both of us have fortunately been able to do that and being able to connect with people like yourself, like that's also been one of the coolest parts of still working in sports because we all have very similar backgrounds and are passionate about the same stuff. And, we still kind of get that sense of team, even though we're not like playing with, on the field with them, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm also passionate about is, like, I just really wanna help have good humans in the world, like, realistically, and I think sports does, and I think sports teach that, and so, the if I can impact the world through sports by having better people because of the lessons that they learn in sports, then that's a win for me.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, you know, probably one of your favorite parts about coaching is being able to guide some of your athletes through the game, but also, be one of their biggest mentors through all of it, right? What else do you really enjoy, or what's some of the more rewarding stuff when working with your athletes at Turn Into?
Yeah, yeah. We have senior awards coming up at Turning 2, and I just got some we have a scholarship that we give out, and so with that scholarship, they have to send in, an essay of what it means to be a part of Turning 2 and what it means to be all in, and I was just reading some before I jumped on, and the overall arching theme was, "I've learned how to lead with kindness and integrity," and, like, reading that, and both of those kids that I read them, the ones I read just coming onto this was is gonna go play college in Division 1, somewhere. And they're both phenomenal athletes, phenomenal seniors, and one is up for player of the year for Michigan, like, but that's what I want. Like, that is probably my favorite part is, like, yeah, we want that, and so it's really cool for that, but on the softball side of things, I love watching players develop and, like, learn how to understand themselves and watch how their swing evolves or their defense evolves and just, like, what that understands and what that means, and now how they can have good conversations back. I think at the end of the day, I wanna have a good conversation with you, and so if you can talk the swing at a high level with me, then I know we're on the right track.
100%. Yeah, I think that's actually a perfect segue into, what I was going to ask you next about Blast Motion. And, you've been one of our best customers for as long as I've been on board at Blast. Did you guys use it when you were at Michigan State? And, how do you feel like that tool has kind of enabled you to develop these players the way that you want to?
Yeah, we did use it a little bit towards the end of my career. I didn't get to dig as deep as I wanted to just from the injury standpoint, but I think in a world where all we care about is ball flight metrics, I think it's super important to understand, like, biomechanic metrics and what that's actually happening, and, you see a lot of stuff out there about exit velo and launching and all that stuff and ball flight and all that stuff is super good, but I wanna know what the body's doing to produce that, and how can we create consistency? At the end of the day, I think reality is if you wanna go play in college, you can't ride the wave, right? You can't be 500 one weekend and then 0 for the next weekend, then 500 next weekend, and now you're still batting 300 and you're like, "What the heck? Why am I not in the lineup?" Right? And because reality is coaches want consistency. They wanna be able to know that, "Okay, this kid's a 300 hitter week in, week in, week out, not 600 and then 0." And so with Blast, that's kind of the big thing that I've loved and enjoyed and using that is like we can learn how to be consistent with Blast. Like, am I able to translate my swing from the tee into a game, and am I able to see what's missing and why am I not able to produce the same results? And when players are able to kind of see that and have their own understanding of what that actually means and what they're trying to create, then all of a sudden it opens up, so much confidence and consistency and things like that. The other thing too, though, that I really like about it is there's so many elements in the game of softball, like, right, whether it's weather elements, right, wind, rain, things like that, but then obviously field elements, and then obviously game situational elements. And I think Blast is important in that regards when, like, I went to a bunch of college games this past year, and I saw a lot of kids hitting with, 25% or 25-mile-per-hour wind coming in, right? And as a coach, your first aspect is, well, what are we going to do about it, right? And so I love using like an attack angle in that situation of like, hey, we're gonna change our attack angle into this, and so we can have these good conversations, and they know how to recreate that in game.
For sure. Yeah. Going off of that, what are some of the swing characteristics that are important to your program that, you look for when they first come on board, or something that you hope that they can continue to develop as they go through your program?
Yeah, I the key ones for us is definitely we use attack angle in the standpoint of what are we trying to do? Ground balls, fly balls, line drives. I love rotational acceleration. I think it's probably the misunderstood metric because there's so much like, oh, I'm swinging at bad pitches. And well, what is our rotational acceleration? If it's low, we're not sequencing properly. So it makes sense as to why we're swinging at bad pitches. So we use that a lot. We use connection a lot, early connection and connection impact. For the most part, with early connection, we don't, and connection impact, we just try to stay consistent. Like, I don't, if I have a kid that hits really well and her early connection is 100 or 105, I'm not going to try to force her to go down to 90. I just want to make sure she's swinging consistently in that range. So that's a lot of the things that we do is the consistency aspect. But then it's fun to talk about like hand speed, right? Like I have kids who love to swing super on front. And I'm like, your hand speed is incredible. Why are we doing that? Like, if you let the ball get deep, your hands are going to be able to catch up with it. So it gives them visuals to help them understand what is their swing and what are we trying to accomplish and where do I need to attack the pitch based off of my metrics.
Yeah, I think, just hearing you speak about it, you're obviously very experienced and have been around the device and, the metrics and data long enough. But, for someone who's maybe just learning the product or, hasn't really been around it at all, how do you kind of simplify it, especially for athletes that, they all learn a little bit differently. They all kind of digest information a little bit differently. How do you kind of attack that sort of hesitation that some people might have?
Yeah, I think what we try to do for our organization, because we have it within our whole organization, is we don't even want you to look at the scores until you have a baseline of anywhere between 250 and 500 swings. And like just swing, just put the sensor on your bat and just swing. Because then from there we can kind of see trends, right? And then we can talk through those trends. The big thing though is I think there's the colors freak people out a little bit, right? Like there's the different colors, they don't know what it means and all of that stuff. And it's like, again, the more you can just learn how to be consistent. Is my swing off the tee, off of front toss, off of the machine, and then off of live? Is the metrics staying the same? Right? That's ultimately what we're trying to get at is we're trying to create consistency. And so what I encourage our players to do that shy away from it or nervous about it or things like that is one, get a baseline, get a trend, what does your swings look like? And then from there, let's set you up in different cages and don't look at the numbers. You don't have to understand what the numbers mean. Just are they the same when you move from cage 1 to cage 6 when the elements change?
For sure. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You might have a kid that hits cage bombs and has their swing dialed and like front toss, but then they can't even touch the ball when they go into, a
Mhm.
live game. So how important is it to get that live game data so you can go back and, you know, talk to the kid and try to figure out like what the missing factor is?
Yeah, I think I mean, at the end of the day, when we're practicing, that's what we're trying to do is be better in live situations, right? And so that's one of my favorite things about Blast. And you see it all in the college game all the time, right? The Blast sensors, whether they're in practice off BP off of, in practice or things like that, is a lot of the times our metrics will change based off of situations. And so one of the things that I see frequently is early connection changes a lot from front toss or tee work to live situation. Well, there's now an element of timing the actual pitcher's motion, right? And well, off the tee, when you go, you trigger and your swing is triggered based off of how you're going to trigger your swing. Now all of a sudden we go off live and now you're trying to time the pitcher's motion, you're trying to time different things like that. And all of a sudden you start to leak your hands and now your early connection gets all wonky. And so and then from there you look at your bat path and you're like, man, this wasn't a good swing. So it's a lot easier for me to have good conversations with kids when I'm like, okay, we faced a pitcher that threw predominantly changeups, right? 50% or more. And your early connection was terrible in that game. And the reason why is because we're leaking our hands because we're trying to guess what pitch is coming at us. And so we try to get live metrics just in that standpoint to understand like what is changing and why is it changing? Is it changing because our swing is actually changing, or is it changing because our timing is off, and now all of a sudden we're rushing, so now we're cutting down on the ball, and our attack angle is bad. So I like to understand the why the metrics are changing before I even think about talking to the players about it.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing you talk about the sport and the swing, I think it's just so crazy how we can continue to learn about,
Mhm.
the game, and I'm 28 years old still playing, but, like, I still feel like I'm learning something new every day from these conversations that I have with coaches and just people that are still in the game, so, yeah, I think that's really awesome, and I think you make some really great points. We mentioned it a little bit earlier, but you do some color commentary, for, Michigan State High School. How did you get into that role, and do you feel like being in the position you are at Turn Two has helped you in that new field of work as well?
Yeah, color commentating is a new one. It's fun. It definitely is a different side of the game because when you're trying to explain the game while it's happening, you start to learn different things and you start to it actually has helped me probably be a better coach because I have to pay attention to pitch sequencing and what the other coach is trying to do and stuff like that. So it's definitely helped me and I think my role at Turning Two has enhanced my opportunities in that regards because at the end of the day, we have, kudos to our athletes. We have a ton of just really phenomenal athletes and so when you have good athletes, the state wants to know why you have good athletes and so they now return to the people that are developing them and it's all kudos to them because they've been really good at it. But yeah, color commentating has been it's been fun. It's been fun. It's a challenge though.
Yeah, we spoke about it a little bit earlier, just, being quick on your toes and, being ready to make a point right after your play-by-play person quiets out. I feel like that kinda ties into, you know, the lessons you learn while playing the game too, just, like, being able to adjust on the fly and, taking those lessons that you learned during your collegiate career and applying them to life, right? Because in the end, like, you hear it all the time, softball and baseball are such microcosms of life, and yeah, what would you say, to your younger self, or what are some, words of advice you give to your athletes having been through that whole process of getting recruited and going to the tournaments and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think to your point is softball and baseball, they're just so life changing in the standpoint of they just give you so many tools, right, to prepare for life. And when I think back to my younger self and I wish I would have known, like you were saying, I mean, the more I learn about the swing, the more I realize I don't know that much about the swing. There's just so much about the swing that we're, and it's cool. The advancements of technology, whether it's blast, all these opportunities that players have now, but don't overcomplicate things, right? At the end of the day, the game is a game. And you're just trying to play it to the best of your ability and it's going to open up opportunities for you that you never knew existed. And that's why I'm so passionate about it at this, you know, 15 to 18U age range. I mean, we have teams all the way down to 8U, but is because it opens up doors that are going to change your life, right? Life-changing best friends and life-changing, job opportunities after school and so I tr as much as I'm super passionate about the game and I mean, I desire to win, I love competition. I'm not going to a tournament unless I, wanna bring my best foot forward and I wanna win, but at the same time, like, it's just a game, and your worth is not in that game, right? And that's ultimately what I would tell my younger self, and that's what I would tell my kids now is, like, let's get better, let's compete, let's be the best player, person we can be, teammate, leader we can be, but at the end of the day, we don't have to forget that the game is meant to be just that, a game.
Yep, it's supposed to be fun, and I think sometimes it's such a up and down game emotionally and mentally that you forget that you're out there because you fell in love with it from a young age, So, yeah, I think you're 100% spot on. And it's just remember to have fun with it because, you don't get to do it forever. And, after your freshman year, the 3 years after that go by so fast, right? You work all your way to get to college, then all of a sudden it's done. So, yeah, I think that's a great reminder, and my coach also used to say, like, person over player, right? So you've mentioned it too, you're like, your worth is not in it. The person that you are, the game doesn't define who you are as a person outside of it. So as long as we're taking some of these lessons that we learn along with us, and, being a decent human, and wanting to give back in other ways. Like, I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, when my players struggle or they're the strikeout in the last game or they gave up the home run, I sometimes tell them, if that is the worst thing that happens to you in your life, then we're doing okay, and I think that's important is just putting things back into perspective, right? Like, yeah, I want them to compete. Sure, I want them to be the best player they can be. But I also want to make sure that we're putting it in perspective that it is not the end of the world and your life will be just okay if you strike out.
Yeah, and talk about an injury too, right? Like, once you go down with an injury, my coach always used to say this, like, you never know when it could be, your last game that puts you out for a few months or whatever it is. And like, all you want in that moment is to be, in the batter's box with the bases loaded and strike out looking, when you go down with an injury, right? So I'm sure you can relate to that. Just like, being able to fail on the field is 100% times better than not being able to be out there and have those opportunities.
Yes, there's no doubt. We had a player a couple years ago that was a highly recruited player, went down as a pitcher and was unfortunately diagnosed with a health condition, and she never got to touch the field. And so, life like that is going to happen. And it's my job to, yes, I'm the director of player development, but I also like to think I'm, the director of person development, right? At the end of the day, I want you to know that I want that player to know she's valued, she's worthy, her whole world, yes, came crumbling down, but she's still an important piece to that program, whether she can pitch for them or not.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, thank you for having me. This has been super fun.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're able to join. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but trying to get this revamped, and would love to, you know, revisit again, down the road after you kind of go through nationals with your 18U team, and see where we're at, and how things have progressed at Turn In 2 and how you guys are growing and continue to grow. Yeah, I appreciate your time today, and I'm sure we'll be in touch soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Maddie.